Hey everyone, Dr. Waters here once again for Game Design Wit and continuing our book review series. Today we're going to talk about Casual Game Design by Gregory Trefay. Trefay? Gregory Trefay. Well, Gregory. By Greg, our good old friend. This book here, as the name implies, talks about casual games. And when I bought it, I thought, okay, let's learn about casual games. There seems to be a rising trend ever since the Wii came out and the Nintendo DS, and with the latest trends in mobile games. And I was curious to see what it would be able to talk about those, because I always, until I read this book, I used to think of casual games as a genre, as a niche for a particular set of audiences and a particular set of platforms. Like it was sort of a rising trend within the gaming industry. And as I myself, I've developed tons of casual games in the past, and I still develop casual games here and there as well. It was interesting for me to be able to get another game designer's perspective on the subject matter. And so that's what my thoughts were when I started reading this. But this book is, although it talks about casual games, it talks about the peculiarities that they have and some of the design tropes. This book actually is a thesis about an idea which completely blew my fucking mind when I read, because I just concur. I think the author, Greggy, is right on that subject matter. And it's the reason why I'm also talking about this book and I wanted to highlight it, and one of the reasons why I read about game design and I discuss it with peers of mine in the community as well so much, is I'm always entertained about that one idea, about that one simple premise that just changes everything on how you approach a particular subject matter. It's kind of like when you have your mind blown, you know. And to me, reading this book was one of those processes because it caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting that to be. What is that thesis then? So, Greg's theory on casual games is that casual games isn't necessarily a genre. It's not like Plants vs. Zombies, it's not Angry Birds. Gamers like myself from the mid 80s onwards, we sort of look at casual games from our perspective, and I think most of us did, as sort of simplicity in design where you took out certain elements known to be as hardcore gameplay elements for an audience that isn't as acquainted with the general design tropes and design patterns and design language that most games have. So, for example, when you look at a game like Angry Birds, you don't have XP curves, you don't have this progression system, you don't have grind, you don't have any of that. It's just simple action, simple repetition, instantaneous feedback. That was my idea and consensus until then. What Greg proposed on this book, though, which I thought was quite elegant, was casual game design is not necessarily a genre. It is not necessarily an audience. It's not a platform. What it is simplicity in mechanics and rules and feedback. And when you look at a casual game, you're not just through the classic lens, let's say, of Plants vs. Zombies or Angry Birds. It's not that those games are casual because of the audience that they have. It's because of the innate characteristics that these games have when you compare it to long stretches of time when it comes to the evolution of a game. So here's an example, just to come up with try to ground this in more concrete examples. Let's take the first-person shooter genre, right? It started out with experiments in the 70s and 80s. You had like Hover Tank and you had Battlezone, and then it started evolving in the mid 90s when you had Wolfenstein and Catacombs 3D, and then you had the mother of all FPSs that pretty much defined a lot of the patterns that you see in those games, such as Doom, and then you had Duke Nukem, and then you have games like Half-Life. So you sort of have this evolution of the first-person shooter genre, and then you started having Call of Duty with its progression system and its multiplayer elements, where you're sort of evolving, although you were playing the same match, and then that created an entire new genre. Not necessarily genre, but game design elements where you need to have the capacity to evolve and to be able to get better stuff and become more powerful, but still balanced in a way with newcomers and new players. And that's, you can keep talking about that until the cows go home. But the idea is, if that's the expression, but the idea is it starts off with a simple mechanic, and then it sort of evolves over time. right? So you started off with first-person shooter, you're just shooting to Nazis or whatever, all the way to XP curves, and Titanfall has also the card systems, and it's just you're building lots and lots of complexity and further design language that engages players and keeps them coming back over this very tiny core MVP, the minimum value product, which is you just walk around in first person perspective and you shoot people in the face, right? So the interesting thing that the book talks about, it's like, imagine if we went backwards. Imagine if we started with Call of Duty 4, with games with that level of complexity, and you also had that kind of genre. And let's say you wanted to make a first-person shooter genre for a more casual audience, not necessarily a particular demographic or a particular audience or platform, but just you want to strip all that stuff out. You want to reduce it to its core component, right? So it's as if we started with Call of Duty and then we sort of went backwards and then launched a game like Doom. And when you think about it, and when you compare a game like Doom to, say, Call of Duty, there's a lot of elements that I could say, oh, Doom is more of a quote-unquote casual game when compared to Call of Duty, because you don't have the progression curves of XP. You don't have character select screens, or you don't have factions or lore. It's a simple game. It's a casual game. So if I could just replace the word casual and simple with this premise, right? It sort of helps me to understand through that lens. Now, I'm not saying that Doom is a casual game. What I am saying is through this model, through this perspective, you can then sort of build a different connection between these games and a different paradigm through which it allows you to be able to stipulate and then build new models. Because if we keep thinking of it as a linear element of evolution, right, you would sort of think of, okay, then the next evolution of the multiplayer first-person shooter genre would be an evolution of the point we are right now, which is progression curves and so on and so forth, and all the other things I highlighted. Whereas if Doom never existed and that simple type of gameplay never existed, you could have sort of head off in that direction, because it's much easier for you to explain a game like Doom to an individual than, say, a game like Call of Duty multiplayer, because then it's just like you just walk around and you shoot, and here's a few guns. Oh, you died. Then you just respawn and here's another guns. Now, I'm not saying which one is better or worse. I don't want to start a troll war or any of that kind of stuff. It's not a value of judgment. It's a matter of being able to look at casual games as a mechanism of simplifying the rules, whatever they are, and then constructing models and design theories from that premise of how do you simplify something? How do you make something more with greater reach and greater broad? Not to say that Call of Duty doesn't have reach and doesn't have broad. That's not my point. My point is, if you look at casual games and you think of casual games as just the perspective of Angry Birds, or a simple mobile game or something that your grandmother plays, you sort of miss the point of the elegance in design that you can sort of construct when you simplify other types of games, right? And you can sort of, and that's what basically this book talks about in a nutshell. And when I read that, I was like, wow, that is a really elegant way and approach to this. Now, yes, it does talk about a ton of casual games like Diner Dash and Bejeweled. It talks about those, and if you are interested in learning about the design elements and the thoughts that occur behind the design creation of those games, you find it here. It's not like this whole book is just this topic that I'm highlighting about. But when I read this, I was completely taken back. I was like, wow, this is a really interesting way of looking at an old problem in a new way. And so I highly recommend that you take a look at this book, not if you're just interested in casual games themselves, but if you're interested in being able to have your biases and your guesses put on a check. It's rare when you have a book does do this so elegantly. And it's not to say that is the truth, right? It's not to say that this is the only mechanism or the mechanism to look at casual games and look at game design and so on and so forth. It is yet another tool that as a designer you can have at your disposal when you're looking at those various things. Because if you sort of understand this is a two-way street, right? Where you can get simple gameplay mechanics and then you can make them complex, right? Where I could get a game like, for example, Tetris, and I can say, okay, I'm going to add all sorts of bells and whistles over the minimum viable product of Tetris, and then say you can have factions and you can have XP curves, and you can make an interesting and entertaining game out of that, and I'm sure you could find an audience for that, right? But it doesn't have to go only in that route of complexity. But the other interesting thing that Zelda highlights, and I kind of do concur with him on that as well, is when a new genre starts out, it starts casual. It starts simple because of the inherent elements of a new genre. Nobody knows how to play that game. Nobody has any previous concepts or biases or language or input knowledge base when it comes to playing those games. So it has to be casual because you're dealing with climbing the hill of just teaching the user how to learn this gameplay mechanic that's brand new. So when you look at a game like 2048, for example, it's a simple, casual game, which is making tons of successes. And you're already seeing this trend of increasing complexity over this game as well. The other day I downloaded an Android version variation of that game where instead of the 2048, instead of number 2 and 4 and 8 and 16, each one of the little things that showed up was like a village. And so when you combine two village units, instead of getting number 4, you would get a tribe thing, and then the tribe, you combine that and it transforms into a city, into a mega city, and then there's another layer on top of that, which is how do you keep your city clean and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like an evolution of that very simple mechanic that was presented with 2048, and but I think I'm just repeating myself, and hopefully you've gotten the point so far by now. The other element as well, which I just loved about this book, it also talks about, okay, if you do start with a casual mechanic and you're trying to reach out to a particular casual audience, let's say you are making a game like Angry Birds or Plants vs. Zombies, you still need to add even the most minute layers of complexity in that game, elements that keep players hooked, right? How do you make players keep coming back? What is the retention mechanisms that you're going to have in there? Not just, push notifications that remind folks to come back to playing the game, but something that exists in their mind and say, oh, I want to go back because I want to do X, Y, and Z. And not just that, how can you have a difficulty curve to a casual audience, right? Because they don't want to be too challenged right from the beginning. But at the end of the day, you still want to be able to present them with a learning curve that fits well with that audience, but also fits well any other audience that might be a little bit more hardcore and wouldn't be as intimidated when it comes to interacting with particular games. So you kind of have like these two different kinds of audiences that you're sort of having tried to design at the same time. And how do you do that? And this book actually goes in depth into this problem domain space as well. So one of the examples I liked about it was Diner Dash, where very simple mechanic, which is, if in case you're one of the 12 people on the planet that never played Diner Dash, the idea is you're managing a restaurant, users are coming in, and you have to pick up their orders, cook their orders, and then deliver those orders for them, right? It's basically running a restaurant simulator at a high level. Very casual. Just click on the places and you're automatically doing those things. How do you make a learning curve and a difficulty curve for that kind of game with that kind of complexity? The interesting thing that they did is, if you're performing the same action concurrently, consecutively, so for example, instead of getting a person's order, cooking the food, and then delivering it, I actually have enough of an audience in my restaurant, and I get order from one individual, then I get another from another individual, then from another, then from another. Those points start stacking up. So it kind of rewards you for being able to do that particular activity or not. So you can finish the level with more points, right? So a skilled player would be able to plan that and act accordingly, whereas an unskilled player would just be doing orders and grabbing things left and right, and both would be having fun. But the book actually talks about the experiments that developers did in doing this, and they actually noticed that they had much better retention rates, and the game just became a lot more fun when they actually added those this difficulty element into it. But at the same time, it didn't necessarily make the game overall harder for the rest of the audience, which is yet another element that you need to think of when you're developing casual games as a whole, which is how do you make different learning and difficulty curves for a wide range of audiences while still retaining a fairly simple, minimal viable product when it comes to gameplay that any player can interact with. And that's basically the core of a simplified game, or in this way, as the book calls it, as a casual game. And at the end of the day, this also goes back to one of the videos that I talked about, the prison of gaming terms, where how language can sort of frame how we can see games and evaluate them, and also inherently design them as well. And it's interesting how a difference in language or how we communicate about those things just opens an entire new door when it comes to designing. And in large part, that video that I did was based from this book and a couple of other books that I read that were just blew my mind when it comes to that. So, casual game design by our good friend Gregory Trafaldor. My apologies, Greg, if you ever do watch this video. But as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. And I've been getting a lot of feedback from the community so far when it comes to these types of videos. I'm doing book reviews because that's something I've done for a while. But if you're interested in me in doing a different kind of topic, or just discussing about some other thing about game design that you've always been curious about, but you haven't seen it elsewhere, just drop a comment down below or shoot me a Twitter message or whatever, and I'll try to do the best that I can. On my next video, I'll be talking about interactive storytelling per one of the suggestions that I got from one of the community members as well. So thanks for watching, you guys and gals, and take care.